Most people believe that mastering English is about money. They assume the countries with the biggest economies must also have the strongest English speakers. They believe wealth automatically buys fluency. That power, technology, and global influence naturally produce better communication. It feels logical. After all, if a nation can build skyscrapers, dominate global trade, and lead in innovation, surely it can master a language spoken around the world. But here's where that logic quietly breaks. Because if money alone created fluency, then the richest and most technologically advanced countries in Asia would sit comfortably at the top of every English proficiency ranking. They would dominate conversations, they would lead international dialogue, they would sound effortless in English. And yet, they don't. Year after year, country after country with far greater resources continues to struggle with confidence, clarity, and natural expression in English. Meanwhile, one nation, rarely described as powerful, rarely labeled advanced, and often underestimated, keeps surprising the world. A country people don't expect, a country people overlook, a country many assume will speak English hesitantly, carefully, even awkwardly. But instead, they encounter something completely different. They hear fluency that feels relaxed. They hear sentences that flow naturally. They hear humor, nuance, and ease. They speak to taxi drivers, students, nurses, office workers, and walk away confused. Because this doesn't sound like a foreign language being practiced, it sounds like a language being lived. And the reason has nothing to do with studying harder, nothing to do with memorizing grammar rules, nothing to do with chasing a Western accent. This didn't come from classrooms alone. It came from daily life, from conversations, media, work, and survival. English didn't arrive as a subject to be mastered. It arrived quietly and stayed. It became a tool before it became a skill, a bridge before it became a badge, a habit before it became an identity. And that's why the Philippines didn't just learn English, it adopted it. When many foreigners imagine Asia, they picture language barriers. They expect communication to feel slow and careful. They expect English spoken with hesitation. They expect people to search for words, to pause, to simplify their thoughts. Broken sentences, heavy accents, awkward silences, short, cautious replies designed to avoid mistakes. And in many parts of Asia, that expectation is often correct, not because people aren't intelligent, not because they haven't studied, but because English lives in textbooks more than in daily life. Then they arrive in the Philippines, and suddenly something feels off. The patterns don't match the expectation. Taxi drivers crack jokes in English, sometimes without realizing it. Cashiers explain promotions smoothly, confidently, and with personality. Students don't just answer questions, they argue, debate, and explain ideas. Call center agents speak so naturally that customers forget they're calling overseas. There's no tension in the conversation, no visible fear of making mistakes, no careful filtering of thoughts before speaking. The interaction feels easy. Visitors don't just understand Filipinos, they connect with them. They laugh at the same jokes, they follow the same stories, they sense the same tone and timing. And that connection creates a quiet confusion. Because this wasn't supposed to happen. The Philippines isn't the richest country in Asia. It isn't the largest by population. It isn't the most powerful politically or economically. On paper, it shouldn't lead in English fluency. And yet, it often does. So how did a country with fewer resources end up speaking English more naturally than nations that seemingly had every advantage? That question, once you hear it, doesn't let go. Many people jump to the wrong conclusion. They reach for easy explanations, answers that sound convincing but don't actually explain anything. They say, Filipinos are just naturally good at languages. They copy Americans, that's why they sound fluent. They just have good accents. These explanations feel neat. They feel comfortable, and they let people stop thinking too early. But they don't hold up under scrutiny. Because plenty of countries consume American movies, music, and television every single day. Plenty of students spend 10, even 15 years studying English in school. Plenty of people can recite grammar rules flawlessly, pass written exams, and score high on tests. And yet, when it's time to speak, to hold a conversation, to express a thought naturally, to respond without translating in their head, fluency still doesn't appear. Accents don't create confidence. Exposure alone doesn't create mastery. Talent doesn't explain consistency across an entire population. So the real explanation isn't genetic, it isn't imitation, it isn't effort alone, it's environment. The kind of environment where a language isn't admired from a distance, but used, needed, and practiced every single day. In many Asian countries, English is a symbol of intelligence, a symbol of education, a symbol of elite status and professionalism. It's the language you use in formal settings, the language of presentations, exams, and job interviews, the language that signals you are qualified. On the surface, that sounds positive, but beneath it, a quiet problem forms. When a language becomes a symbol, it stops being neutral. It stops being safe. People don't just speak it, they perform it. And performance invites fear. They fear sounding stupid. They fear choosing the wrong word. They fear being judged for their accent. They fear embarrassment in front of others. So instead of speaking, they hesitate. They rehearse sentences silently before opening their mouth. They translate thoughts word by word in their head. They wait for the perfect moment that never comes. And when that moment doesn't arrive, they choose silence over risk. In the Philippines, English never rose onto a pedestal. It was never treated as a badge of intelligence. It became a tool, a practical, everyday instrument used to get a job, pass school, watch movies and TV, work abroad, communicate daily with strangers and friends. When a language is treated as a tool, mistakes aren't failures. They're part of the process. Perfection doesn't matter. Being understood does. And that single difference changes everything. The Philippines didn't plan to become an English-speaking nation. There was no national strategy, no long-term language blueprint, no cultural decision to replace one identity with another. It happened quietly, almost by accident. When American rule introduced English into the Philippine school system, it wasn't framed as a foreign language to be mastered someday. It became the medium of instruction. English wasn't something students prepared to use. It was something they used immediately. Children didn't study English just to pass English class. They studied science in English, mathematics in English, history in English, geography, literature, and civics in English. From the very beginning, English wasn't separated from learning. It was woven into thinking itself. Students didn't translate ideas into English, they formed ideas in English. And that distinction changes everything, because when a language is learned as a subject, it stays academic, it stays theoretical, it stays distant. But when a language is learned as a tool for understanding the world, fluency develops naturally, without force, without fear, and without constant self-correction. You don't practice speaking. You simply speak, and over time, the language stops feeling foreign at all. Now compare that to much of Asia. In many countries, English lives in a separate box. It's isolated as a subject, not integrated into life. Something you study for a grade, not something you live with daily. Grammar is prioritized over speech. Rules are valued more than rhythm. Exams matter more than expression. Students are trained to choose the correct answer, not to respond naturally. So they know the rules, they know where the commas go, they know which tense is correct, they know how to structure an essay, but they don't know the rhythm of real conversation. They can write long, impressive paragraphs. But when faced with a real person, a real question, a real moment, they hesitate. They search their memory instead of their voice. In the Philippines, the approach is different. Students may not always speak perfect English. They may make grammatical mistakes. Their accents may vary, but they speak usable English. English that works in real life, English that moves conversations forward, English that connects people, and in the real world, usable beats perfect every single time. Another silent advantage lies in entertainment, an influence so constant that most people don't even notice it, yet powerful enough to shape how an entire generation speaks. In many Asian countries, foreign media is filtered before it reaches the audience. Movies are dubbed, English voices are replaced, tone, emotion, and rhythm are rewritten in the local language. Viewers understand the story, but they never hear the language. Exposure becomes indirect. In the Philippines, the experience is different. English media stays English. Accents remain authentic. Expressions stay real. Children grow up hearing how English actually sounds when people use it naturally. They hear natural pacing in conversations, humor delivered without explanation, sarcasm that depends on tone, not subtitles, informal speech, the kind textbooks never teach. So Filipinos don't just learn English as a system of rules. They absorb how it's used, how sentences rise and fall, where jokes land, when silence matters. And that's why Filipino English doesn't sound stiff or mechanical. It sounds lived in. Here's where everything compounds. Because Filipinos speak English early, they become comfortable with it before fear ever takes hold. Because they're comfortable, they use it more, without overthinking, without hesitation. Because they use it more, they practice constantly, even without realizing it. Because they practice constantly, they improve faster than those who only study in controlled settings. And because they improve faster, they gain confidence, not the loud kind, not the performative kind, but the quiet confidence that says, I can express myself, and I don't need to be perfect to do it. And confidence is the real fluency multiplier. Grammar helps, vocabulary matters, but confidence determines whether any of it ever leaves your mouth. Many people around the world know English. Very few feel free using it. And that freedom makes all the difference. Outsiders often criticize Taglish. They see it as sloppy. They assume it's a shortcut. They believe mixing languages must weaken proficiency. But the opposite is true. Code switching doesn't break fluency. It protects it. By allowing speakers to move seamlessly between languages, it removes pressure. It keeps conversations alive when vocabulary momentarily runs out. It replaces silence with continuity. And continuity matters more than correctness. Because the moment fear disappears, fluency grows. There's no panic over missing words, no embarrassment over imperfect sentences, no sudden shutdown in communication. Instead, meaning keeps flowing. This flexibility trains the brain to adapt quickly, to prioritize ideas over form and expression over rules. It builds linguistic agility, a skill most rigid, rule-bound language learners never develop. And once that agility is in place, moving fully into English becomes not harder, but easier. Then came globalization, and everything changed. Suddenly, English wasn't just useful, it was profitable. It opened doors to call centers and global customer service. It unlocked remote work for international companies. It powered careers in healthcare, education, and technology. It became the key to overseas employment and a better life abroad. English turned into a bridge, connecting the Philippines directly to the global economy. And this bridge wasn't abstract. It paid salaries, it supported families, it funded education, it reshaped entire communities. When a language creates opportunity, motivation skyrockets. English stopped being something people should learn. It became something people needed. The question was no longer, should I learn English? It became, how good can I get? How far can this take? Is me? And when ambition meets daily usage, fluency stops being optional. It becomes inevitable. This is why foreigners are surprised. They arrive expecting effort. They listen for hesitation, careful wording, measured pauses, sentences constructed one piece at a time. But instead they hear ease. They expect rehearsed answers, polite, predictable responses memorized in advance. What they get is natural conversation, back and forth exchanges that flow without strain, responses that adapt in real time, ideas expressed without translation or delay. They expect limitations, a ceiling to how far the conversation can go. Instead, they encounter humor, subtle nuance, timing, sarcasm, and confidence. Jokes land naturally, stories unfold smoothly, opinions are shared without apology. And in that moment, something collapses. The stereotype they carried with them quietly falls apart, not because Filipinos are trying to impress anyone, but because this is simply how they communicate. And that's what surprises people the most. So why does the Philippines speak better English than most of Asia? Not because Filipinos are more intelligent, not because the country is wealthier or more powerful, not because it copied the West or tried to sound foreign. Those explanations are easy, but they're wrong. The real reason is far simpler. English was never placed on a pedestal in the Philippines. It was never treated as something sacred, intimidating, or untouchable. It wasn't reserved for elites. It wasn't locked inside classrooms. It wasn't protected from mistakes. It was placed in daily life, in schools and streets, in work and entertainment, in conversations, jokes, arguments, and everyday needs. And languages thrive where they are used, not where they are feared. They grow where people are allowed to be imperfect, where communication matters more than correctness, where speaking is normal, not risky. The Philippines didn't chase English. It didn't obsess over it. It didn't treat it like a test to pass. It grew up with it. And that quiet, accidental intimacy made all the difference. Because in the end, fluency isn't built by admiration from afar. It's built by living with a language, every single day.